warm welcome to our panel, Stemming the Tide, the threat of rising authoritarianism across Europe. I'm very, very happy to welcome this marvelous speakers here on our panel. So we have Li Andersson. Li Andersson is the chairperson of the Finnish Left Party, or the movement of the left. She has been serving as a minister for education in the last progressive government, which ended this year in May. I guess, was it May? Yeah, the elections were taking place. And now Li is also still member of the parliament and city councillor in her hometown Turku. And you will let us know a little bit more about the situation in Scandinavia, especially in Finland here. I also welcome Karen Ley. Karen is a member of the German parliament from the Left Party. Karen is spokesperson for housing, and also, that's very interesting, for club politics of her group. And she has holds her constituency in Saxony, one of the areas in Germany, which is very much threatened by the far right with a high rising, and Karen will tell us a little bit about her work. I'm also very happy to have Aaron Grossman-Kiss here. Aaron is based in Budapest, is an artist and many more things, but also member of the party. You have to help me to pronounce this. Sikra is right, and Aaron is responsible in the party for international relations, and since Hungary is since a long term under a big pressure from the far right, I guess we also can learn a lot about how he even managed to build up the left party in that situation. I'm also very happy to have Mish Rahman here. Mish is a member of the NEC, co-chairperson of Momentum, is working in many ways with anti-racism everywhere across the UK. I guess a lot of you know him already a little bit more. Thank you, Mish, also for being here. I'm Johanna Bussemer. I'm the head of the European unit in Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung. Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung is a left-wing German organization working everywhere in the world, and also happily in the UK and in Ireland, and I'm also the director of the office here, and we are contributing happily to TWT and also to this meeting. And what we're gonna do now is that we start with a round with our speakers here to give them the chance to describe a little bit the situation in the countries they are coming from, and talking about what the far right is doing, but also, of course, how to deal with the situation from the perspective of being a left politician. And we start with you, Li. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation, the possibility to participate. And as you heard, we were asked to start with a bit of context and background from our countries, since I'm sure you don't all follow Finnish media on an everyday basis. As you heard, there was a change in government in Finland this spring. We had the elections in April, and after that they had historically long negotiations. And in June, we got a new government coalition, which was formed by the mainstream conservative right wing, together with the radical right, the True Finns. And I think for many people that do not follow Finland very closely, I think maybe what you have seen was first the Sanna Marin as this example of a progressive female leader talking about equality and climate change. And then the next headlines from the summer was that a Finnish minister had to leave because using neo-Nazi symbols in his messaging. So I guess a lot of people are thinking what actually happened here in between. So I'll try to give a bit of context of what actually happened. I think what is important to know is the True Finns, a little bit of background around that party, because there's also been a change within the True Finns, I think, which is important to emphasize. Their first big win was in 2011. That was when they entered into parliament with a big group of parliamentarians and a big support, which they have been managed to keep quite well since 2011. The background of the party was a kind of agrarian populist party, so in 2011 their main themes was to be anti-elitist, anti-EU. It was also a value conservative party. Their party leader was very much against same-sex marriages, but immigration was never the main topic for him, for that party leadership, although he did create a forum for the xenophobic right to enter into the True Finns, but they were still at that point kind of the minority within the party. In 2017, there was a change in leadership within the True Finns. A new leader of the party was elected called Jussi Halla-aho, and with him also started a change in emphasis of the party. His background was in the more radical right-wing part of the party, which has now become the party, the mainstream within the True Finns. Focusing very much on immigration, anti-Islamic, anti-Islam agenda, anti-immigration agenda, and not so much anymore on value conservatism or anti-elitist agenda. In 2017, when the change in leadership happened, the True Finns were in government, and this led to a split in the party, because at that point the mainstream right-wing conservative party in Finland said that we will not govern with the True Finns led by Jussi Halla-aho. They are too extreme, they are too far right for us. After that, we had, during the previous government term, a quite progressive government coalition, which was voted as a reaction to the right-wing coalition we had from 2015 to 19. So for the last 4 years, we had a quite progressive government of 5 parties, all led by women. We had quite a turbulent term because we were faced with the COVID crisis, the Russian war of aggression in Ukraine, the energy and cost of living crisis that followed that. But we managed to stick together during the whole government term, and also to pass some very important reforms in the spheres of education, welfare, and also setting the most ambitious climate target that Finland has ever had. This election was very much about none of these issues, actually, not about welfare issues, not about climate policy. It was all about public debt, where you could see the mainstream conservative right-wing party and the radical right, the True Finns, grouping up together on this kind of anti-public debt agenda, which they used very heavily to hit the parties that had been in the previous government coalition. And as you all understand here, no government can handle crises such as COVID and the energy crisis without taking more public debt. So this was, of course, a very dishonest way of doing politics, but it was a very effective weapon that they used against us. And especially the True Finns, apart from the issue on public debt, they also talked about cost of living, and especially about the price on gasoline. So that was kind of their second big theme, I think, in the elections. All of the other parties lost votes last spring, except the Social Democrats, because of Sanna Marin, her big popularity. But the Social Democrats came third, so they kind of also lost their position as the first party. They were not able to form a government. So now at the moment we have this very right-wing coalition with the True Finns, and in opposition you have the Left Party, which I represent, the Greens, the Social Democrats, and also the Centre Party. And I think you can already see like a new trend also growing in Finland. If you look at the support for the left-wing party, in the latest poll we got 9.8%, which is a very good number for us, a party left of the Social Democrats, and also the membership in the party is now higher than it has been in 25 years. So there's I would say if I would define Finland, I would say that you can see this push back and forth. So you have like reactions, developments, and counter reactions and developments all the time, and that's also something we've seen in the elections. We will come back more on strategies and conclusions on this, but the big story in Finland, if you look at this government coalition, is the changed position of the mainstream right-wing party, which were now willing to take the true things into the government coalition, which they were not in 2017, although there has been no kind of ideological shift in the party. And why did they want to do this? Because they want to enact a program now with huge cuts in social security, very bad labor market reforms from a point of view of the workers, and also several laws tightening our migration laws, which the aim of the government is to kind of take everything down to the EU minimum. And this is very much the same tendency and development that you've seen in Sweden, actually, just to end by this, where basically exactly the same thing happened a little bit earlier, with the difference that the Swedish right-wing party is not in government, but it's the official support party of the government. But in the same way you could see there that the changed position of the mainstream conservative right-wing has enabled these parties to get power. And the reason they are doing this is because they want to do cuts in welfare, structural reforms, which will change our labor market laws and change our welfare structures for the worse. And that's the motivation for the change in position within the mainstream right.
Hello. I want to talk first on the situation of the far right and the rise of the far right in Germany. I think the situation is very serious. Since 12 years, we do have a popular right-wing party, which is called AfD, which means Alternative for Germany. And they started as a more moderate and conservative party. They have been far-right, extremist right-wing parties before, but they never made it into the national parliament. And then 12 years ago, when the European Union decided to support Greece and the southern European countries in the crisis, they founded themselves, which is part of their myth of their foundation. And they're getting stronger and stronger since many years. They're part of the national parliament, and they had in the last elections 10%. But they are very strong, especially in the eastern part of the country. They are having 18% in the last elections. And the opinion polls now seeing them with 15, 16 or 18% if there would be an election now. So they are very strong, and the danger is that they're getting the strongest party, especially on the eastern parts of the country. And there will be elections in 2 counties in East Germany in the next year. And all the surveys and opinion polls say that they might become the strongest party, and they already began to, when there have been elections in some cities, they were getting a major, for example. I see many similarities in the ideological background, what you called about your country. They started as well as a more right-wing conservative mainstream party, but they are going more and more to the extremist right direction, and the extremist right people in the right-wing party of Germany, they are gaining more and more hegemony in the party. There are also many similarities on their main subjects. So it's anti-migration, anti-refugees is their overall subject. And when, I don't know, we are discussing in Parliament any issue, and after 2 minutes, they will always come back to anti-migration. So this is like their main subject overall. But it's also anti-elitist, which is pretty strong, anti-European Union. Now it's getting stronger and stronger, the anti-climate politics. And also they are going, anti-Islam has been strong in the beginning, and so racism and nationalism are the main subjects of the so-called alternative for Germany. When there will be these elections in the 2 Eastern German countries, I see the great danger that it won't be possible to form a government or majority without the right-wing party. So what can we do? There should be a moral coalition between the remaining democratic parties, but the Conservative Party, the Christian Democrats, they are more and more preparing for a cooperation, I think, with the right-wing party. And before, there has been a taboo on issues like racism and anti-Semitism, and there has been a taboo on working together with the right-wing party. But I see that this taboo is more and more removed, and they are starting a cooperation, or at least some kind of toleration. So I see the danger that, for example, in Thuringia, which is an East German county, with a progressive government and with a left-wing premier minister, then probably, perhaps, a conservative will lead this government as a minority government, but in fact they are getting tolerated by the far right. So this is one of the main dangers I see for the next years. So what are the reasons? Of course, the economic crisis is behind all of this, the crisis of 2008. But also it's more racism, it's more nationalism, it's the removal of the taboo of all these themes. And also the recent economic crisis, the inflation, is fueling this shift to the right. This party is very strong in the eastern parts of the country, in the more peripheral parts of the country, and also east and west in those cities who face the decline of industries. And so less perspective, less economical perspective is an issue, and also that times are getting insecure. And in those places and regions where the times are more insecure and people are less wealthy or don't have a perspective, it's all paying into the far right party. The strength of the right wing also has to do with the weakness of the left party. I'm sorry I have to say this, because we are in a pretty miserable position right now. We did very bad in the last elections. We had under 5% of the votes in the last elections, in the last polls. And we are having a very serious strategic discussion and fights in the left party. And I think perhaps or probably we are facing a cleavage of the left. Very rough, it's a subject on its own, but very roughly between a more like traditional, conservative, almost nationalist left politics and a more like progressive politics. It also has to do with the decline of the Social Democrats and the Greens, which are forming a government together with the Liberals, but they are also doing bad, I think because of pretty bad politics, because they did not find an answer on all these multiple crises in a solidarity way. So if there would be elections now, and there will be elections in 2 years, I see that we will probably face a shift to a conservative-led government. So Germany is facing a big political shift to the right, not only in elections, but also in the political climate and the political discussions. And the far right managed to almost gain hegemony in the political discourse. So whenever there is a talk show or political discussion, it's all about the themes and the issues and the answers of the right. It's all, for example, there are elections in Hessen, which is like the region around Frankfurt in the center Germany. And if you see the election campaign and the public discussions on TV and in the newspapers, it's all about migration and security issues, and you know, almost every party is making the worst answers towards refugees. And so this is the really bad thing, that we as a left, we are not in the position to put our issues, our themes, the social problems and all these insecurities and all these injustices on the political agenda. And also for the media, it's also so interesting to talk about migration and refugees all the time, as if there would not be other political problems in the moment. And so this is the tragedy of our situation, because all this economical crisis, the political crisis, the democratic crisis would call for a strong left party, right, for answers of solidarity. But what we are facing is the far and strong right movement, and they are also dominating the political discourse right now. We have 2 more years to change this. Then will be the next elections on the national level.
Thanks, and it's great to be here. It's also a bit daunting to share the stage with representatives of such venerable movements, because our movement is very young. It's just 3 years old. We have 3 part-time employees working for us, and when the government threatens us, we know this is serious. It's also daunting to speak about Hungary because I feel it is so widely misunderstood internationally. On the right, usually people take at face value Orbán's pronouncements about being pro-family, about being all about sovereignty, about defending the nation. Liberals would understand the Orbán regime, which has been lasting for 13 years, is only a question of culture. Suddenly someone awoke in Eastern Europe and wanted to do a dictatorship of his own. And on the left also, I sense quite a bit of confusion regarding Hungary, where sometimes state intervention is seen as something necessarily leading to redistributive policies and more social politics. But Orbán, while he has become a model for the international far right, here as well, he celebrated at the Tory conference, he's also very much the product of an international context. And it's easy to get lost in the headlines discussing Orbán's latest scandalous statements or his feuds with the EU or his friendship with Putin. And it's often easy to forget that Hungary and Hungary's position remains defined by its position within the EU and Europe, which is a semi-peripheral country, a country whose whole economic model is subservience to the Western core and mainly to German industrial interests. So what happens in Hungary cannot be understood only in terms of internal politics, but we need to look at the wider economic arrangement. I've talked about this at length in the previous panel, so I will not go into the details so much, but we need to understand the whole regime as a way to negotiate dependence. And what does a small country open to international capital flows do to shore up its sovereignty in a way? And what does it do when the EU, when international capital pushes for an export-led model? Because what we see in Hungary is exactly the result of these policies. What we see is an industrialization in the past 10 years by foreign, mainly German-owned auto companies, which profits from the lax labor conditions in Hungary, from the way labor unions are repressed, the way wages are kept low, the way it's almost impossible to achieve collective bargaining or to form a union today. This is not because we suddenly woke up in Hungary and hated labor rights and wanted to exploit everyone. We need to follow the money and understand who profits from this. It is also important today, at a moment when the Green New Deal is being rolled out through Europe. We have seen in Hungary the establishment of electric battery stations, again in the name of green politics, but these factories displace local communities, pollute local lands, and are all producing car parts for export. But it also is important to understand the achievements of the Orbán regime and the way he has used creatively arms of the state that even many people on the left have refused to think of. We have seen the National Bank working hand in hand with the government. We have seen the nationalization of key utilities. We have seen the nationalization of pensions. And it's important to underline that these specific steps have not led to a more equal society. On the contrary, we see inequality rising in the past 12 years. We see the poor people becoming even more poor. We see Hungary having the highest rise in billionaires amongst EU countries. But also, we need to understand that these tools can be used and the neoliberal taboo and dogmas can be broken. When we speak about authoritarianism, as in Hungary, when we see a far right in power, usually the media pundits, the commentators, the press focuses on issues of culture wars, of the absence of press freedom, of unending hate campaigns against refugees, against Soros, against whoever it might serve. And these are all very real issues, and I do not want to diminish them. The same goes for academic freedom and so on. But it is also important to talk about labor rights, about the absence of social housing, why Hungary has become a tax haven for foreign companies. Because this is authoritarianism in practice. We are at an interesting crossroads in many ways, because we see all over the world a return of industrial policies. We see what has been called the return of the state. And so Hungary, in many ways, this strange hybrid, represents a laboratory for things that might come. And I hope the discussion today will help in shedding light on what's happening there and what counter-models can be built there as a lesson for us all.
Thank you, Aaron. I myself am not only daunted, I'm actually quite intimidated by the strength of the panel that we have today, and I think being and speaking for the host nation in terms of the situation that we have in the UK, I think it's quite difficult as well, because as you all know, the state of the UK currently is that we are most likely in a proto-fascist state where we are awaiting for something to happen, and the biggest concern that we have right now is whether this trend is reversible or not, and that is probably our greatest challenge right now as well, because the biggest fear we have is the rise of the populism and the populist policies which end up resulting in these kind of short-term reactionary policies which harm the long-term harmony of our communities. You might have noticed yesterday, since Tory conference finished, photo footage or video footage of Rishi Sunak with Italy's far-right Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni. These photos aren't actually quite fresh because the two of them share political relationship going back quite a few months. If you remember back in April, she was welcomed into Downing Street. Now, for those of you that don't know Giorgia Meloni, she is as good as the heir apparent of Benito Mussolini and his fascist party and the politics that he started and she continues. About, if you remember, Sunak actually praised Meloni's stance on migration, saying that the values between our two countries are very aligned, and Meloni also agreed, telling Sunak that on many topics we are on the same side. Now this is actually this statement that they're both on the same side on many topics. It's so true, it's eerie and scary and obviously dangerous. On migration, if you recognise the rhetoric, Meloni has warned that Italians are the victims of an ethnic replacement by waves of migrants who she has branded criminals and rapists. Now this is way before Suella Braverman and Rishi Sunak started saying these things. They're very familiar. Now Sunak's government has gone on into overdrive in so much that Meloni herself will be impressed at the fast pace that this has happened with. Sunak's government's made a lot of political capital, and in recent weeks, months and days, a series of unsubstantiated claims about migrants and crime, while warning that those that are coming to UK, and also specifically stating that certain ethnic groups already living here do not share our values, that multiculturalism has failed. And obviously at the front line of these attempts of disinformation is his Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, who obviously is warned of migrant invasions and promoted anti-Semitic conspiracy theories of cultural Marxism, etc. Now, obviously I would argue that the UK's values on migration are actually even further right than that of Meloni's and Italy's right now, because Sunak's current plans to detain anyone arriving in the UK by boat and to deport them to the human rights abusing nation of Rwanda are actually things that Meloni and her fascist colleagues could only dream of, and this has actually become government policy. So obviously on other culture war issues, they're both also aligned, and it is quite commonplace for while us on the left, I mean, one of our panelists did say that one of the main reasons of the strength of the right is the actual weakness of the left itself, while we ourselves on the left continue to struggle and bicker and fail to unite. The right actually copy each other's playbooks. I mean, we have similarities if you look across the continents between where people like Netanyahu and Modi are copying their own homework and the way their nations behave. And then you have also with Sunak and Meloni, their culture war is also similar. Their attacks on trans rights, their attacks, their affirmation of transphobia, as you saw in the recent conference speech. This is all obvious and going on. And then the other thing that we have, which is obviously different to places in Europe, in the UK, we have dog whistles replaced by pure incitement, and this too by people of colour in government who are on some kind of driven mission to become the most racist brown people in the UK in their quest for far-right acceptance, because this is literally what's happening. They're on which one of them can outdo each other on the racism that they want to do. So it's actually made it really hard to get rid of the Tories. Now you might think, what's he talking about, because Labour are so hard ahead in the polls, but it's not just the Tories you're getting rid of, it's the ideologies and the actual spirit of some of the Tory policies that will likely remain, because we do, I make no qualms about it, we have the most authoritarian Labour leader in memory, and this spineless, inept, macho, culty, control freak, ladybull leadership, which is leading comfortably in the polls, have shown no intention in some of the ways to actually revoke some of these Tory policies. So although we might get rid of the Tories, it's actually the Tory ideology that we have right now is going to be more difficult to get rid of. Obviously we're going to speak about strategy. There's also one of the things that we also must understand, that Britain has always been an authoritarian state. Don't forget, We live in a constitutional monarchy where one person can revoke parliament and get rid of things if they can, and then you've had in the past prime ministers actually being in contempt of parliament. People, it's not just Boris Johnson, you have people like Theresa May, and then obviously the media and stuff, but I think we'll talk about that in the next round. But I think there is ways also to defeat that, and us and we as people and people on the left also have a huge responsibility to do that. But we'll move on to the next.
Thank you all for the great contributions. I guess we already see that that the regions we all come from share a lot of challenges. We see a lot of the threat of the right is similar almost everywhere, but we also see that there could be things done on the left, not only in the countries we were speaking about now. So we just had elections in Spain, for example, where the left, like you, also managed to stick with a good result. We see the developments in Ireland, where you can see that Sinn Féin as a not very typical, but also considered to be a left party, could gain good results in the moment. So I guess now we should have the second round and concentrate a little bit also from your experiences in the government. You were part of what can we do, what works, how could we do work on the ground on the one hand, but also what could we learn from each other, and what do we need to do together? Because I guess what we also could see here is that the right was probably faster and better in the last years to interact all over Europe and also within the United States to pick up their strategies. I guess, Aaron, what you said is very important, that also the far-right leaders or the authoritarian leaders are constructed also not only within the countries. Of course, they acted very well, but there is also a lot of influence. We see it in the topic of Russia's war against Ukraine. You also mentioned before, Lee, that of course there is a lot of influence also on politicians within the countries, and it brings the political situation in many contexts to the far right. So what do you think, what needs to be done now, and what could we contribute?
Thank you. Not the easiest question, I must say, but I have 4 points. I think I have one thing I know that works, and 3 points where I think we could and should work a bit more. The one thing I do know that works is agenda setting, which you referred to actually in 2019, when we had the elections through which we formed the progressive government coalition. The agenda in the elections was around welfare issues, especially around elderly care. We had a huge crisis in elderly care. And also climate change was another very big theme in that election. And you could really see how that benefited the Social Democrats, the left and the Greens. We all won that election. But this is not always so easy, as we all know, who gets to set the agenda. In the last election, I said all the time, that if we talk only about debt, economy, and the spending on the military, it's not going to be an easy election for the left. It's very hard to kind of change that around when you look at the general attitudes. So for us to be successful in agenda setting, we need to work really broadly. Together with NGOs, together with other parties. I had a lot of meetings with other party leaders in the elections in 2019 about, when we all talk about the same issues, when we have a bit different, ideologies, we have different solutions, but we talk about the same issues, then we can manage, if we are successful, to kind of push certain big themes on the agenda together. And especially if there is support also from civil society, there is a possibility to do this. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's possible. Other issues I think is important that we have to work more on. The first one has to do with the political center and the right-wing parties that are not far right. Because the whole idea around the anti-fascist consensus was always that it's not only the left, it's everybody, right? And this, as I said, the biggest change that has happened is that we're losing kind of the mainstream conservatives parties. We're losing them from this anti-fascist kind of consensus. And we need to find ways to keep the political center along. I know that this is not the way that the left usually thinks, because we think about ourselves. But I really think when we talk about anti-racism and anti-fascism, we need to be able to construct movements and messages that will work for a very broad audience, also for people who do not identify as leftist, for them to kind of be able to still participate in the anti-fascist consensus. And this might mean also that we need to learn to work together on certain issues with people we are not used to cooperate with. Because I'm personally worried about losing the political center. I think this is also something happening in many countries when the far right gets bigger, the center parties disappear. And at least from a Finnish context, we will lose our the parties that we usually need to form majority coalitions if the center parties disappear. And I also think that's one place where this kind of shift is important, that if we talk about anti-fascism and anti-racism in society, a kind of shift of attitude there can shift the whole society quite far. Which brings me to my second point of concern. The most dangerous thing that the True Finns has done in Finland is a right-wingization of the voter base. And this has also been studied, that if you ask the True Finns how they identify politically, they identify much more right-wing now than they did in 2011. Even the same people, there hasn't been like a change of all the voters, but the same people identify as more right-wing. The current leader of the True Finns, when she described their voters, she said that they are ordinary working people who provide for themselves. They earn their own money, and they are tired of paying so much taxes. It's a very kind of anti-social security, and also to a growing extent very anti-labor union agenda. They are shaping the values of their voters in this direction. And you can already see it if you look at union organizing in Finland. It's going down, especially in the male-dominated industries. This is a very, very dangerous development, in my opinion. And there is also like a gendered dimension to this. At the same time as you see this right-wingization of the working class vote, or the vote that the True Finns has, you also see a feminization of the left, because increasingly voters for the left party, the Greens, the Social Democrats, are women. And this also, I mean, we have more women parliamentarians, the share is bigger than before. It's not our fault as women that this is happening. But it still means that we're kind of losing the struggle for the male working class vote. And there was a reference to the culture war thing, and I think all leftist people always, our reaction to the culture war is that we can only lose, because they're always putting us in a position where we do not kind of recognize ourselves. But we do need to find our own position where we battle for the soul, the identity and the values of the male working class. I'm speaking very bluntly now. And I think it does not mean, as you said in Germany, that there might be forming a conservative left wing. I think that's also a dangerous direction. So we need to keep up the fight for values in that part of the voter base, and think about who can be a person participating in that value struggle and struggle for identities and symbols. My third and last point has to do, as you said, about international cooperation. The right wing is very similar in each country. They have very similar way of talking. They use the same arguments. They copy issues from different countries. So I do absolutely think that in the left that we could benefit a lot from more international cooperation, from knowing what is going on where, copying things that work, copying symbols and issues as we want to do it. We actually also saw, when the True Finns now came into government, the reason Finnish media picked up on the neo-Nazi symbols, I think, was because of international media coverage. There was no new scandals, they were old things. But the Finnish media was getting so used to the True Finns that they weren't really picking up on these issues anymore until the German newspapers started writing, and then the other newspapers started writing. And I think that's also kind of an example of how we can use international cooperation and raising issues in other countries as a ways to kind of put pressure in our own countries. Yeah, maybe I'll stop there so we have time for discussion.
Well, yeah, the similarities are so stunning. So I really want to mention that we didn't talk before, we didn't know each other before. But I also have 4 points and they are quite similar. And I also would suggest that we need a double strategy, which is roughly shaped as we have to say we have to have a clear stance against racism and authoritarianism, and at the same time we need a strong social politics. And so let me point this out more in detail. So the first thing is what you call the anti-fascist stance. So as I said, we are facing a normalization of right-wing themes like migration, anti-corona, anti-elitist things. And also we are facing more and more cooperation with the right-wing party and movements, starting on the communal level in some of the city parliaments, but it's going upwards to the county or even national level. And we are also seeing that these corporations are normalized in the political discourse, mainly from the conservative party, but I'm sorry to say this, also by a few, but very loud, like left-wing politicians. So that cooperation with the far right and talking only on their right-wing subjects is somehow being normalized. And I think we have to be very clear on this point as a left movement and a left party. We don't want these issues, we don't want these anti-solidarity solutions. And so I think we have to be very clear in our no to racism and anti-Semitism and any form of authoritarian solution. The second point, that's what you call agenda setting. So we have to have a strategy to put our themes of social injustice, on rising living costs, on rising rent costs, on climate crisis, more on the political agenda. And what I see that all these issues are falling down from the table of what is broadcasted in the media, for example. So I think that the media are very, high on all these issues on migration, refugees, and so on. So we need to make sure from the left that our themes and our solutions are getting on the agenda again. And of course we need a strategy for this. We need partners in civil society, but also we need people and prominent politicians to represent all these themes. The third, what I said is, I said that the right is very strong on the peripheries and very strong where people don't see a perspective for themselves and where they are facing a decline of their economical position. So I think as a left we have to get their situation more in our view and address the issues of the peripheries more and more, because people have the feeling, for example, in the eastern part of the countries, that their economical problems haven't been seen or faced in the last 10 or 20 years. Many people who have been workers in industries and lost their jobs in the economical and industrial decline have the feeling that their issues and their problems are not addressed by politics. So we have to do this. We have to see them and address their interests. The third thing I want to say that we have to be more offensive against the far right, because what I witness in the public discourse is understanding, and also prominent politicians from the left say, well, we understand they are addressing the problems, and yeah, we do have problems with migration. But I think this is the wrong way to address the rise of the far right and the rise of authoritarian movements, because it just makes them and their issues and their themes strong. And I think we have to be more offensive in fighting them. And for example, fighting them because their economical and social agenda is completely against people with a low income. So we have to point this out even more. For example, in my main subject, my theme in rental and housing politics, they are very on a completely conservative and liberal politics. They're making politics for the great housing companies. They're making politics for the owners. Also in many other, like in labor politics, they are so conservative, they're so liberal, and so, but they're still voted by people who would suffer against their economical politics. And I think we have to be much stronger in addressing this and communicating this. And so this would be the third point I want to say. And the fourth is, of course, we need a strong left again. And yeah, we have to do a lot of homework in Germany, and we have to solve our internal problems. And I'm completely convinced that only a progressive left agenda can solve these problems, and only a progressive left agenda which is anti-racist, anti-authoritarian on the one hand, but also very solidarity on the other hand, can solve these problems and can face the rise of the far right.
In Hungary, we also have challenges in terms of building the left for quite a few reasons. The first is we don't live in a democracy anymore by any stretch of imagination, and we're faced with an extremely repressive state. Then it's also important to underline that much of the neoliberal term in the 90s and 2000s was instituted by left liberal parties, which have not acknowledged this responsibility. But perhaps even more importantly, usually we imagine the Orban regime as in the classical fascist mold, but not at all. It's not a regime which seeks to mobilize people. It mainly rules through disaffection and people not wanting to get involved into politics. So in a country where social atomization is so high, where people have been so disaffected, where people have been separated from each other by politics, our primary goal has been to build a community through politics. It's very important for us to constitute a movement where we can offer something to the people. We don't only want to offer people the opportunity to leaflet in the rain and print journals and go knock at people's door. We need to do what parties have traditionally done, which is build our own institutions, build a place where people can come to learn, to be part of something bigger, where they can enhance their skills, where they can test things out. And this is what we do. We have a very strong education program with different reading groups and different themes, from theory to hands-on questions. We also have a very strong mentorship program. When someone applies to join our movement, they receive a mentor of our conversations. We make sure everyone finds their place and finds something to do which is useful for them as well. We also intervene in very concrete issues. We had a strong track record in resisting evictions in Budapest and now in other towns as well. And perhaps because we're so young and we're operating in a context where democracy has been so hollowed out, we have a luxury of only intervening strategically within institutional politics. We have one MP, which is a huge feat in Hungary. He was elected last year, and we're also going to run in municipal elections, and Hero Comrade is going to run in June. And keeping this inside-out and outsider position is extremely important in moving forwards. I obviously agree with Karen about having to maintain an anti-racist, anti-fascist stance. This is something we're ready to pay for. We had a comrade imprisoned for anti-fascism in the winter. But also, it's important to acknowledge that however people have been indoctrinated by the far-right's stranglehold over media, it seems poll after poll that most people do want more social policies, do want a more social state, and in fact approve of more money towards healthcare, education, and stronger labor rights. And this is what we see in Hungary as well. So our task has been to find the campaigns that can bring people together around these issues, and to also politicize some questions like homelessness, which have been usually used as a stigma by the far right, to thematize questions of access to housing, unemployment benefits, and so on. So what I would say it's important, well, from our experience, it has been important to constitute a strong membership on which we can count. Because if you just have party members on paper, it's not going to be useful to build the kind of resilience we need in the face of what we're facing, but also to be proactive in helping other movements, helping renter unions, helping trade unions, and the like. And the last thing I would like to add is obviously we can do what we can under tremendous pressure in Hungary, but the response has to be internationalist as well. In the previous response, I mentioned the whole global economic context, which defines what's happening in Hungary, and I see this wider trend on the left as well, with different nominally leftist parties retreating into the nation state and feeling if we can defend our own working class, then somehow we will save a given nation state as a bastion of social democracy or something. This is impossible, and until the moment when or while the green transition, for example, will mean that countries in the West can go green at the price of having dictators and misery in Eastern Europe, such a project will obviously fail and spawn new monsters on the right. So I'm glad to be here at a meeting where people from very different countries and contexts can talk and collaborate.
My comrades on the panel spoke about setting the agenda. Now, here in the UK, we all know one person who was very popular in terms of being able to set the agenda, and that guy was Nigel Farage. He did set the agenda, and there are lessons to be learned in the way he set the agenda to recognise our failures and the failures that we continue to have, because obviously to create any strategies we need to recognise where we're losing. He set the agenda in such a way that his 2015 UKIP manifesto has now become, many bits of his 2015 UKIP manifesto has now become conservative policy. I think I saw a video from Politics Joe the other day where Ava Evans was comparing the policy of 2015 UKIP with current conservative policy. Now, that has to be a massive concern, and the way that he did it has to be also learned from. One of the things that also one of the comrades spoke on the panel is about the language and the way we talk. So far or too often we are told by sensible politicians who say, oh, we've got to talk about immigration, we've got to talk about the immigration problem, we've got to have adult conversations about immigration. And we do, but what they actually have to stop talking about is the negative results of immigration, because they never talk about the positive of immigration. So instead what we should be talking about more is about the positives of immigration and the actual failures, not of immigration, but of governments to be able to provide for people and our communities, because obviously the positives of migration is stronger than failure of governments who actually stop it, and because of the failure of governments, it's end up the migrants and refugees and others who actually do it. I think the other problem that we have, and we have to recognise in the UK, is that we have lost and are continually losing the propaganda battle. And this is one of the main reasons, because for any functioning democracy, you need a free media, you need free information. And I think it's worth it, especially for our panel, to also learn about some of the things that have gone on in the British media, and maybe for us to re-jog our memories with how much disinformation and how much our media has spun us. If you remember the run-up to 2019, and in 2019, a number of incidents. In 2017, the BBC Trust said that its political editor, Laura Kuenssberg, breached journalistic rules by inaccurately reporting Corbyn's views on shoot to kill 2 years earlier. Do you remember that? In 2019, Kuenssberg was accused, obviously her and the BBC denied, of breaking electoral law by announcing the results a day earlier. Do you remember that? Do you remember Newsnight portraying Corbyn as a Soviet against a Kremlin background? Now, nobody talked about why is Corbyn being portrayed against a Kremlin background. All they talked about was whether the BBC had altered the hat's image or not. Do you remember? Do you remember how free Wi-Fi was broadband communism? Do you remember Emma Barnett asking Angela Rayner with Labour nationalised sausages? Do you remember BBC Question Time editing out people laughing at Boris Johnson? So if you remember all this, the reason we're losing the propaganda battle is because the BBC is actually being run by actual Tories. The BBC Director General Tim Davie is an ex-Tory councillor, former deputy chair of a local Conservative association, and the chairman has donated, Richard Sharp has donated almost £500,000 to the Tories since 2001. So we are losing and have lost the propaganda battle, and obviously I think in the discussions above we need to learn about how we can beat down, obviously from our colleagues across, but I think the biggest thing, obstacle to a functioning democracy is this disinformation and the fight. Also, one of the main things why we've lost and why this authoritarianism, especially in the UK, is happening is because I don't want to be too romantic about the Corbyn era, because obviously there were a lot of flaws, but between 2015 and 2017 we have to recognise that the establishment were terrified. They recognised that us and working people were almost into government, and hence this progressive populism just kind of exploded, and it's carried on and it will carry on obviously into forthcoming governments because of their route to choose this authoritarian rule. I think the main other thing that we also need to do is that we are the last line of, I'm the front line of battle in terms of facing down the far right and facing down authoritarianism. I think we have to be able to be organising ourselves and organising our community and protecting as well, because when it comes to it, the politicians never speak up against the far right. They're too embroiled in the culture war and too embroiled in slipping over each other as well. So I think we need to discuss strategies about how we safely protect ourselves and our communities. We're not talking about going head on with the far right at all, but we have to find out a strategy of how we do it, and hopefully we can learn from how our colleagues across Europe are also doing that as well.
So thank you. I guess it's hard to have a little in-between resume, because we raised so many interesting and important subjects right now. So we see the threat is taking place everywhere. I think we also see that the wall between a cooperation of the radical left and the conservatives could fall already, or is going to fall everywhere, and we have to have a sharp strategy against that, which is taking place now and not in the future. So I guess one of the things we see that we maybe hesitated too long, and we need them, for example, in Germany, immediately. I was also very interested by your point, Lee, and I'm still thinking about in keeping the center, because this is not what we usually do. I mean, we were there for attacking the center from the left with our radical views, and it seems to be complicated to do both at the same time, but I guess you are right, and so it's maybe more a little bit about a very strong liberal, not in a liberal, a neoliberal way, more in a humanitarian liberal way, keeping a strong background, which could be also filled from the left. But I guess we could discuss that further. So I think we could have had panels like on each country. Also, thank you, Aaron, for reminding like how hard the work on the ground is. We have the same problem in Germany by losing party members, and see how much work it is like for every person, but it needs to be done, so we have to find the strengths for doing that everywhere. We would open up now for your questions. All those people have traveled very long for coming here, so use the opportunity to really ask questions and not to make long statements, because you will not have the chance to have them here. And try to stick with the topics we are talking about. So I already see some hands. Deborah, can you help me? Yeah. There are three more here, one on the back. We take three together. Yeah.
Thanks for the contributions. It's really interesting. And I just wanted to ask Aaron if you could reflect a bit more on maybe what would be the relationship or the shape of the new labour movement that would have to come in order to contribute to this form of organizing that I understood that you center into the community organizing, and actually being able to provide and involve people in working through our material needs, which I think is one of the bases of resisting the far right.
Hi, I have some friends in Germany, so it's the lady, sorry, okay, so when I went to Germany many years ago, fascism was very much underground. So I'm going to ask a good question. Fascism is a very dangerous thing, and how can you all work together and everybody else work together to fight fascism? Because I've been fighting fascism as well for many years, as a Labour councillor previously, and just as a local campaigner. So I'd like to know, how can we really radicalise that and get it booted out?
So I'm a trade unionist in the NHS, and I'm also a member of the Left Party in Slovenia, so it's brilliant to see, sister parties from across the European continent talk about this really pressing matter. Usually the explanation we get is that unequal countries shift to the far right. But what we're seeing even in the Nordic countries, as Lee has explained, in Finland, in Sweden, is that places that were models of equality, multiculturalism, and workers' rights are falling to extremists. So my question is mainly for Lee, also for Karen, and obviously I'd like to hear your views as well, is why, in your opinion, is this tidal authoritarianism breaking all the barriers and reaching even places we thought were immune so far? And what does that mean for our strategy? Because I was campaigning here when we were trying to win the election in 2019 with a very progressive manifesto, and that was not enough to fight against, the xenophobia and the bigotry that Johnson was basically representing. Thank you.
Hi, I have a question for Lee. So you mentioned the feminization of the left vote in Finland. I was wondering if you thought there had been any impact in terms of the feminization of the leadership of the far right. Like, so Mish mentioned Giorgia Meloni in Italy, Marine Le Pen in France, Riikka Purra in Finland, the Progress Party in Norway, the Denmark Democrats. It seems that there seems to be a very different face of fascism today compared to what is traditionally associated with it.
Yeah, thank you. My question is also for Lee, sorry to add to the list of questions you've got. If I'm okay to challenge the, I suppose, the view that we should collaborate greater with the centre and the traditional conservatives with a small c. I recently finished reading Homage to Catalonia, so George Orwell's book, which is great, and topically he provides a view that actually a lot of the human fighting there was between views that we should sort of collaborate with the centre to beat the fascists versus the fight against sort of liberal democracy or liberal capitalism as a different kind of the same coin to fascism. Do you think there are risks collaborating with the centre, with the traditional conservatives, that essentially strengthen and enable, I suppose, a system that creates the conditions for these things to emerge in the first place? These are often very sort of reactionary things to crises that exist, and to Aaron's point, often they can be leveraged to actually drive sort of capitalist interests further.
Okay, thank you. Once again, very good and difficult questions. I'll start with the female leadership, actually, which, especially as you said, is also a shift that has changed in many of these radical right parties. In a Finnish context, at least, this has been one very strategic step for them to mainstream themselves. So if they kind of started out by getting, a certain part of the voter base, especially in Finland with the Riikka Purra leadership, she has been able to kind of broaden up their agenda. And also I think they have gotten more female votes than they have used to. It's still a very male-dominated party if you look at their politicians and their voters, but still there's been an increase. And I think, for example, Riikka Purra's Instagram account, which probably none of you have seen, is full of pictures of like vegetarian bowls, like this healthy eating stuff. And she, she talks about, she's a vegetarian and she uses vintage dresses and stuff like that. So she's kind of breaking up the old image of what the true Finns are. And the reason they are doing this is, I think it's especially the same with Meloni, is that they are strategically now mainstreaming themselves. Now they've broken through, the more radical agenda has been accepted by the main right-wing coalition parties, and now they are trying to broaden their voter base. This is what they are doing. When I talk about cooperating with the center, I didn't mean like forming political coalitions always with the center on everything. I talk especially about anti-racism, these issues. And my logic is that we need to kind of be able to push the agenda back into the margin, right? This is the danger that it used to be, I think Germany is a very good example. It used to be something that it's a taboo, you cannot, nobody would accept you speaking in a certain way. They have broken out of the margin, and the way that they have done it is through the shift in position of these more mainstream right-wing parties that are taking after their rhetorics. And when I think about my own country, at least, if I challenge the National Coalition Party on issues that has to do with this, it doesn't really make them scared. We have no voters choosing between their party and mine. It's not, pressure on them. So, in our interest is also what's happening within the right wing. Are there any forces in the center that are trying to push for an anti-fascist agenda or are pro-immigrants? Can we somehow cooperate or support them in formulating their political messages? Because they are the ones that could put pressure on the more conservative right-wing parties, I think, at least more than I can do this. So on these issues, I think we should think about the political center and how we can build broad collaborations on issues that regarding racism, fashion, these very basic fundamental freedoms and rights. When we talk about economic issues, social policy and so on, there I can agree with you that we should not enter into collaborations where we do bad policies just to keep out the right wing, for example. We have experiences of that also from Finland. And when we talk about why the Nordics, I think it's important to stress that if you look at Sweden, for example, it actually isn't this happy, furry, equality country that it's always presented about, because there's been a huge rise in inequality in Sweden, going on for quite a long time now. There's, you know, if you look at the Swedish education system, there's huge segregation in housing, in the education and so on. I think this context is also important to remember when we talk about the Nordic countries. But I think at least one point where we have lost has to do with this kind of battle of values and identities. So I don't think that the voters who voted for Riikka Purra and the True Finns, when we are attacking them now because they are doing cuts in social security, the reaction is different from what it was in 2011. Last time the True Finns in 2011, when they went into government and did cuts, they lost half their vote in 1 year. Now they have been losing 1% a month, but it doesn't seem to be like the same, because they have managed to change the values of their voters in a much more like conservative right-wing way. So I think we really need also in the left to have our like worker representatives really vocally kind of talking about being a proud worker, not hating the environment, the climate and immigrants because of this, and kind of going into this battle of their souls and values and identities much on our own premises, not from the place they want to put us in the cultural war. I hope I'm being clear enough in English.
So you mentioned or asked for the fascist ideas and movement which is underground, which you felt to be underground, very strong in Germany. And this is true. This might have been always there, but it was not possible to express it in public. And that's what I mean when I said there has been a removal of a taboo on all these issues on anti-Semitism and racism. And it started with the social media. It started many years ago with Facebook, and the right-wing movement has been very systematically going into the social media and doing this strategy of removing all these taboos in the social media. So it hasn't been the public opinion broadcasted in media on the newspaper, but it started on Facebook. Everyone could tell every racist shit with some false name. So that's where it started, and I think that we as a left movement and as a left party, we didn't recognize it early enough to make a counter strategy also in communication. And this is part of the whole thing that we lost, what you call the propaganda battle. And so what can we do? I mean, first thing is to face it. And that's where it started, especially the conservatives. They always had this strategy on denying that there is this fascist abuse. They said, well, it's not that bad, and no, we shouldn't take it serious, and they didn't face it as a problem. That's the first thing, to face it and see it as a problem, and then to address it, and also to address it as a racist and fascist ideas and movement, and not to like minoritizing it and saying, well, it's just, you know, it's not really racist, it's just a normal opinion. And this is part of the whole propaganda game, not to addressing it and to facing it as what it is. Yeah, so what to do? I mean, we all had similar ideas on it, so addressing it, seeing it, facing it, making a strong stance against it, and also being very clear and radical and a left-wing progressive agenda, and not addressing, not to try. There are parts of the left who want to, you know, addressing all these problems on migration, and I think we have to be on the counter side. We have to address our problems. We have to make a narration and a narrative from the left viewpoint. And I think this is the most important thing to do. You didn't ask me, but I want to mention that what you were framing as the different or newer or feminine face of fascism, we have this in Germany as well. I mean, the party base is pretty male-dominated, like 80-90% it's men in the parliaments and in the groups in the communes. But as a political leadership, there have been 2 female politicians in Germany which gave rise to the far right. I don't know who is familiar. One has been Beatrix von Storch, and the other was called Frauke Petri. The last one, she has been from the eastern part of the country, so they had a female face. And now one of the most popular leaders of the right-wing party, she's a woman. She is living in a lesbian relationship with an Indian woman in a binational lesbian partnership with 2 kids in Switzerland. And she's so full of hate against Muslims, against migrants, and so on. But she's giving all this authoritarian and racist shit a modern face. And I think you're very right that this has to do with the strengths and also with the fact that they won the propaganda battle somehow. The last thing I want to mention, I forgot this when I tried to characterize this right-wing German party and which are their themes and issues. And as I said, it's like it's a very racist and anti-migration, but the interesting thing, it's very much pro-Russian as well. And especially now where we're having this discussion on the war and how to stop the war and who is like responsible for the war, they're making many points with a pro-Russian perspective. Yeah, I don't know how this is in the other countries, but perhaps we're going to discuss this later. But they make many points, especially in the former east part of the country, with this pro-Russian attitude on the war.
Social media has a big role to play, and propaganda as well, coming from a country where public media is fully government controlled. But I also think that only focusing on these aspects kind of sidesteps the new creative forms of statecraft that fascist or neo-fascist regimes are instituting. And it's kind of a strange historical moment when we have the right speaking about windfall taxes on the banks and price controls, and the left is even outflanked by the liberals. So I think we also very much need to think about what form of state do we want to build, because we're not transformed historical moments post-COVID. Thanks a lot for your question regarding trade unions. This is very dear to my heart. I think it's also when people on the previous panel were speaking about how trade unions were weak in the UK, I had to chuckle because it's unimaginable, not only in Hungary, but in the whole Eastern European periphery, that something like the RMT strikes would happen. Because labor has been so thoroughly destroyed since the 90s, and in a way that has endured again and again and again, that we're in a totally different moment of historical defeat. So when we're talking about building something with trade unions in Hungary, but it could also be in Slovakia or Romania, it's a totally different context than here, where I know trade unions have been under attack. So it's important to recognize the international context, first of all, which have basically forced these countries into dependency and pushed them into adopting anti-labor laws. So international actors need to be pressured, obviously. And within these countries specifically, what we've been trying to do is build common platforms with trade unions and go over seeking what we can offer as well. Because in a context where trade unions and labor itself has been so depoliticized, We cannot come directly with a political offer and unfurl a Rosa banner and ask people to join. We need to find the common causes and link issues of housing, for example, to labour, link issues of green transition to labour, and then move on. A very inspiring example comes to me from Serbia, where we have comrades in a very similar situation to ours, recognizing the weakness of a trade union and the labour movement, who have decided instead of working only for the trade union campaigns to thematize the question of a living wage. And this concept doesn't exist basically in Eastern Europe. I know here it has become more and more prevalent, and so they organize a campaign around the living wage rather than the minimum wage, and through this campaign, working as kind of a platform where trade unions and different social movements could come together has really shifted the discourse and in a way pushed also the center to adopt this question of the living wage. So we can think in these terms, and I would be happy to think about it together.
I'm going to be short. I'm just fascinated by the evolution of a fascist that you've just described. I mean, in the UK, we have fascism has evolved in such that we have a Home Minister who is a person of colour, who is the daughter of immigrants, and is the most right-wing. So I dread to think what the evolution of beyond that will be in future. But then also, as an example of the other authoritarianism that we face, we have a Prime Minister who nobody voted for, who just came in and made it harder for people to vote, which is also, I'm sure, unprecedented and probably hasn't happened in your nations yet. Just to answer the comrade from Slovenia, I think my opinion on the 2019 and how it became so difficult and the whole thing turned ugly is, if you remember when there was a time when Theresa May tried to take a sort of executive control of Brexit and pitted the people against the politicians and said, this is what the people want and the politicians are the ones stopping it from happening. I think that was actually in history a very important point because by the end of 2019, when the elections actually came, if you polled, more than half of people who wanted to vote was supporting somebody who's strong, somebody who will deliver Brexit, and somebody who is willing to break the rules or do whatever to do that. And that is one of the main reasons why we have escalated to here, because if you also then remember, because throughout this growing swell of support, it led to far-right groups joining the Tories, and that also led to a huge lot of irrationality, and this authoritarianism solidified, and that was probably the defining moment that led to the horrific situation around the 2019 election. So yeah, I think we've heard a lot of positives. I don't think we all have the answers, but I think just going forward, one thing that I would also urge is that I think to protect human rights right now is that probably, which is a sad thing to say, is our number one priority, because all these governments, authoritarian, their number one aim is to get rid of and reduce human rights as much as possible. So I think our strategies have to align, and it is a very basic principle, and it's a sad state of the affairs that we are in, that to protect human rights has to be our number one priority.
Thank you all. This was already, I guess, the best last words which we could have here. Thank you all for coming. This was super interesting also for those of us like me who stick very deep into the politics of European countries. I guess we all will go on to interact together. You all can see Lee as well tomorrow on a discussion of education. So everybody who is interested to learn more. Thank you for the questions, and we're gonna go on fighting the far right. What else should we say?